Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of About Time with me, Chris Nichols. As you know, this is a series where I get to talk to people whose work I love and who've inspired me and influenced me over the years. And I'm delighted that one of those is Beccy Speight. And Beccy, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here with you, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah. So I suppose, you know, I mean, I know your job title, and I think everybody knows that from the show notes. But um, can you introduce yourself a bit? I mean, what do you say to people when you say who you are?
Yeah, well, I kind of usually end up, people usually say, "Aren't you doing trees?" Because I used to do the Woodland Trust, and I end up saying, "No, no, no, now it's birds." So, yeah, so I'm the chief exec of the RSPB, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, and I've been doing that for nearly 6 years now. And it's a fantastic job, and people always want to know more. So people always want to know more about kind of why and kind of how birds are faring, and then they've always got things they want to tell you about the birds that they see. And yeah, it's great. It's a role I kind of I think I was on a bit of a trajectory towards, because I do
Yeah.
feel that the RSPB has a really important role to play, and ending up being somebody who um, has some influence, I suppose, over where it goes next feels really, really important.
Brilliant. Well, I'd love to talk about that, and that may be a great place to start because now normally I get people to introduce their organisation, and I will. Yeah, but I suppose I think lots of people think they know what the RSPB does, but
Yeah,
I'm sure it does a load of things that actually we have no idea about, and it's a big organisation, isn't it? He
yeah,
said, not
yeah,
really knowing.
so it's got some. I mean, it depends on how you measure scale, I suppose, but it has 1.2 million members, which is fantastic. So, these are people who are very close to our cause and, support us financially, but also support us spiritually, I think, in terms of what we're trying to achieve. Um, Staff wise, it has about 2,500 staff, paid staff, and about 12,000 volunteers. So, the bulk of the workforce is actually voluntary, which is amazing. And then I guess in terms of the money, it's income wise, it's probably about 180 to 190 million pounds a year, which is considerable. So we are the largest kind of charity in Europe that's focused on nature conservation. So that's our big focus. And I say that deliberately because a lot of people think we are just birds, but really birds are our expertise, but they're a great way into the natural world. I mean, if your birds are thriving, then probably the whole ecosystem is thriving. So they're a great lens to kind of look at the whole of the natural world. So although a lot of our science expertise, for example, focuses on birds, it's really just a way in to have that whole conversation about the health of our natural world and what we need to do to restore it. And I always say we do five things. We do species work, so we look after, and try and restore specific species. So an example of that would be curlew, for example, is a species of huge concern at the moment here in the
Okay.
UK. We do a lot of work around places. So we have some 200 nature reserves in the UK, and we work internationally as well in places like, well, Gola, for example, in Sierra Leone, which has just been declared a World Heritage Site, which is fantastic. So we work
Yeah.
kind of internationally as well as in the UK in specific places and important habitats. And then we do a lot of science work. We have a science team of our own, and we do a lot of work with other partners and universities, creating the kind of evidence base really for what approaches work in terms of restoring nature.
Okay.
And then we do a lot of work on policy. So we try and influence government policy, domestically here in the UK. A lot of the relevant policy has devolved to the different nations in the UK. And then we have, we do some work internationally on policy as well, particularly on climate, as well as nature restoration. And then we do work to connect people with nature. So I guess that's our kind of theory of change, really. You have to do all of that if you really want to get nature moving in the right direction. So we're broad, we're broad,
Yeah.
and birds are a way in for us, but it's not just birds.
Hmm. So, I mean, we could go almost anywhere from that. So, how do you come to be doing it?
Yeah, I'm a lucky girl.
Yeah, but did
I,
you? I mean, did you at some? Because I've known you quite a long
yeah,
time. Yeah, and you were way back. You were in the National Trust when we first
yes,
met, but
yes.
that wasn't a chief executive job. But it was a was you a
No,
director? You were a director, weren't
yeah,
you? At some
yeah, yeah.
yeah yeah.
Which is
Uh,
probably why they were spending all the money to have me spend some time with you, Chris. I think I think it's sort of when people say describe your background to me, I always say eclectic because it kind of really is. So,
but are you a Are you a scientist?
no, my first
No,
degree was English Lit. So that's
right.
that's what I did as my degree, um, which I loved deeply, and I'm still very interested in that. But I then kind of went and I worked in local government in Scotland because I was in love and I needed to be in Edinburgh. And I was lucky enough that at that time they sponsored me through an MBA, so I did start learning some kind of interesting kind of businessy type stuff.
Mm,
Um, and then and then I won a prize doing that MBA, and on the back of that, one of the then big six consultancy firms, accountants, consultants offered me a job, and I thought, well, I don't really want to work for you, but I could go and do a bit of management consultancy, and so I got kind of uh, headhunted by a small consultancy that was just sort of starting up down in London,
right.
and I moved down there and did 5 years of that, and that was a real kind of learning curve. That was loads of work on big mergers and that kind of stuff. A lot of the softer side of change, so kind of people type stuff, comms type stuff. We'd often go in alongside, a BCG or something like that,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I did that for 5 years, and I loved it, and I kind of grew with the organisation. But I just got to the point where I was thinking, so in 5 years' time, what will I've done? I will have done another 5 years of this, and I'm too kind of curious, I think, to kind of do that. And I suppose, shareholder value is a very useful concept, but it couldn't be the thing I was kind of, ultimately working towards for ever, I didn't think. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
that's when I made the leap into the sector. So that was about 2000. I joined the National Trust because that was what I knew. I'd grown up in Dorset and I knew that they had lots of land and lots of interesting buildings, blah, blah, blah. And they were mad enough to take a punt on me and put me in charge of the Stourhead estate, which is this amazing place down on the border with Wiltshire
Oh
and
yeah.
Dorset.
So
Yeah.
it's the banking family, isn't it? The
Yeah, it's still
yeah,
a very
Edward
famous private bank.
Hawes Bank.
Yeah, on Fleet
Yeah,
Street.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and it was their estate originally, and half of it had come across to the National Trust back in the kind
Mm,
of 1940s.
mm,
So that was the half that I looked after, and I learned so much doing that and loved it. But then I think I got onto a bit of a trajectory about, well, where is the fight biggest at the moment? And I didn't think it was around built heritage. As important as built heritage is, I kind of felt there were lots of good government policies and regeneration policies that were kind of doing some of
mm,
that. But I could see that nature was just, which had been so important to me as a kid, growing up in Dorset, I could see that nature was just sort of evaporating before my eyes, really,
yeah,
in terms of what I had seen as a kid and what I was now seeing in the landscape. And then I think I was on a bit of a trajectory to help with that fight. And so that took me ultimately to the Woodland Trust as CEO, and
mm,
then on to the RSPB. So if you want to do something about what's happening to the natural world, I think there are a few places better than the RSPB to be, really,
yeah.
because of that broad approach that I talked about and that theory of change. So yeah, here I am. Yeah, loving it.
Brilliant. Yeah. So 6 years there. Woodland Trust was how long? It was a while, wasn't it?
5 years. Yeah,
5 years.
yeah,
So you've been
yeah,
a CEO of major, nature focused organizations for a decade,
yeah.
more than. Yeah.
Mm.
How's nature doing?
Well, I always say that you have to be careful because I think we win some fights along the way
Yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of, trying to kind of save a particular species. I mean, if you look at something like, bitterns is a bird we always talk about in the RSPB. So that's a lovely kind of heron-like bird that has that kind of booming call in the
Booming
spring.
sound,
Yeah, it
yes.
sounds like
Yeah.
someone blowing across the top of a milk bottle kind of thing. But they were kind of almost gone basically, say 20, 30 years ago, and now of course they're back in substantial numbers, and that's because we've managed to kind of restore a lot of habitat for them, which is basically wetland, and make sure they've
Mm,
got the food they need, etc. So you can win some really great victories like that. But overall, nature is not in a good state. So, when you look at there's a report called The State of Nature, which we coordinate roughly every 5 years. And that brings together data from across the whole sector. Everybody joins in and provides their knowledge and their data. And that is showing us that there are kind of still huge declines going on in terms of the UK, and around the world. And we've got species at the risk of extinction. We've got kind of huge loss of habitat. I mean, the main drivers of decline are basically climate change. So that's
yeah.
causing a lot of decline in the natural world. Um, the changes to the way in which we do agriculture over the last 50 years. So that has really intensified, and that has caused huge changes to habitat. And then you've got
Mm,
things like kind of pollution, inappropriate development, all those sorts of drivers, and mainly human driven, of course. So,
yeah.
I always talk about kind of, we're kind of mining the natural world rather than harvesting from it now. And that is what is causing a lot of that loss and destruction, really. Um, that's a time when, we as a species are facing into the impacts of climate change, and we know that nature could provide us with some of those solutions. So it's kind of madness, really. So
Yeah.
just trying to get that shift so that you can get to a world, which is our vision at the RSPB, is a world where people and nature thrive side by side, and just trying to get that shift to happen so that we use nature in a sustainable way and appreciate the services it provides for us as a species. It's a really important shift that the world needs to make.
Yeah. I was at the Global Tipping Points conference at Exeter University probably a month ago now. And that's the Rockstrom, Johann Rockstrom, Tim Lenton,
Yeah.
was it Potsdam Institute, Max Planck Institute, and University of Exeter, essentially. Um, and it was good to be there because um, it was a proper academic conference, so there were lots of PhD poster presentations and postdoc presentations. Um, and some of them were looking at movements in certain fish stocks as an indicator of tipping points. And as you were speaking, I was just thinking there must be some work, or perhaps there needs to be some work on birds as a systemic indicator of tipping points. You're probably going to tell me, yes, it exists, and yeah, does it exist?
I'm not sure about birds linked to specifically kind of climate tipping points,
Yeah,
but birds are some of the most kind of research species that we have.
yeah,
So we know a lot about birds. There's still a lot we don't know, but we know a lot.
yeah,
And so that's really why they're such a great indicator for us of the health of the natural world. If your
yeah,
birds are in decline, if your birds are doing badly, then you can bet your bottom dollar that the habitat as a whole, the ecosystem as a whole, is doing badly.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
so they're incredibly, important in their own right, obviously, but also important as indicators of what is going on in that wider
yeah,
situation. So if you take kind of, peatlands, for example, which we know are incredibly important when in good condition as kind of
yeah,
sequesters of carbon, but also, holding back water in terms of kind of the flood risk we're now facing, for example.
yeah,
If you get your peatlands into a better condition to do all of that, what you'll find is that the great bird species like golden plover are back, for example. So it's kind of the two are so intrinsically linked, and birds are a great way of just kind of looking at that and monitoring that and measuring it and knowing whether we're succeeding or not.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I love that. sentence you started with, actually. You said if birds are thriving, then the whole ecosystem is doing well,
Yeah,
and correspondingly, where birds are not doing so well, there's probably something very wrong in the ecosystem.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and I'm aware of things like the red list, which looks at species in grave danger and kind of stratifies that. I mean, is there something that you use to kind of as an indicator of overall well-being, so you can if you're heading in the right direction or not?
excuse me. Um, well, I mean, definitely in terms of species and bird
Yeah,
species, we would use things like the red list. So we
yeah,
contribute to that. And
yeah,
help all that together. And that's based, for those who don't know, it's basically a list of kind of, the species that are most under threat, which will be on the red list. Sadly, a list that is growing. And then you have amber and you have green and so on. And so there are ones that you're less worried about. But there are more than 70 birds on the red list now, 70 bird species. And that includes things like puffin, for example, which is such an iconic bird for so many people, in terms of our coastline, particularly in the UK, and yet the puffin is on the red list. And and
yeah,
I think the British
yeah,
Trust for Ornithology has done some work that shows that if we don't turn things around for the puffin, they could go extinct by 2050, which would just be absolutely tragic on all sorts of
yeah,
levels.
yeah.
So
And
that's how we look at
so
species. Yeah, yeah, go on.
no. I mean that's fascinating, and I'm always interested in the relationship between like something charismatic like
Yeah,
a puffin and what's causing the pressure on the puffin, which is
yes,
probably the loss of something spectacularly uncharismatic but massively important.
yeah, yeah. So
Like their food or
yeah,
ground
so
cover or
food is
something.
a
Yeah,
it's a big issue for puffins. So
yeah,
we did
mm,
we campaigned, I think, over decades to try and make sure that we don't overfish sand eels. So sand eels are a really important food source for birds like the puffin, and those stocks have been really reducing, and still a big heavy fishing industry around sand eel for going into often kind of animal feeds and so on.
yeah,
And so we campaigned for a long time and did a lot of science work to prove that. And fantastically, we have just seen sand eel fishing banned in the English North Sea and in the Scottish seas, which should hopefully be a real lifeline for species like puffin that really rely on that as a food source. But
yeah,
you've also got issues around, for example, we do a lot of work around biosecurity. So a lot of these
mm,
seabirds nest in what seem like very kind of inaccessible islands,
yeah,
or places along the mainland coast, and yet if they are attacked by an invasive species like rats, for example, that can completely destroy a nesting site. If rats get onto an island where they haven't been before, they've not got much of a food source, they'll go after the bird eggs. Puffins nest in burrows in the ground. They're very exposed to that. So we do a lot of work to kind of make sure that those sorts of nesting sites are also really safe and secure for them, and that biosecurity is in place to make sure that we don't reintroduce those species that can cause so much harm. So it's a sort of a
yeah,
complex web. It's not just
yeah,
food. It's not just having the safe nesting sites. It's not just being able to deal with the impacts of climate change so that they're having to fly further to forage for food, etc. It's the
yeah,
combination often of all those factors that you're having to think
mm,
about and tackle. And that's what
yeah,
makes the work complicated, makes it hard and difficult. But where we can get it right, you can see
yeah,
nature come back quite quickly. We did a big piece of work on Lundy, which is just off the Devon coast, an
mm,
island just off the Devon coast, really important for things like puffin. We did a big piece of work with the National Trust, who own it, the Landmark Trust, who manage it. We came in with our expertise, and the numbers of nesting seabirds really bounced back after we were able to do kind of a rat eradication there, for example. Yeah.
yeah.
So when you
And
get it
and
right,
and and
nature responds.
yeah. And there's one farmer, isn't it, on Lundy who farms it as well. He's a tenant of the
Of the Landmark
yeah
Trust, yes, yeah,
of
yeah,
the
yeah,
Landmark
great
Trust.
guy,
Yeah,
yes, yeah,
yeah, yeah. So I've been there quite a few times, and I'm
yeah.
familiar with some of the work there because of that. So it's brilliant. So I
It's a
remember
fascinating
the
place. Yeah,
yeah, and I
yeah,
remember the impact of rats in the story there. Yeah,
yes. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So we're doing, I mean, at the moment, I can think we're doing some work on the Scilly Isles around kind of rat eradication. We're doing the same, some eradication work on Rathlin, which is an island off the Northern Irish coast.
Right.
And and we're doing some work on actually stoats up on the Orkney. So these they're really important. We've driven these species. They nest in these kind of very edges of places, and we need to kind of make sure they can continue doing that successfully. Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, we could spend the whole of this time, and indeed the rest of the week, talking about projects like this. But I'm wondering, you've got the five things you do: species,
Yeah.
places, science, policy, and connecting. How do you balance your time as CEO? I mean, are you constantly doing all
Badly.
five? Or yeah, I mean, what do you do? What do you do all day, Becky?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I think well, I kind of see my role as being a number of things really. One is, that the sort of the public kind of face of the RSPB. So I've got some great directors who do this as part of their job as well, and some great trustees. But ultimately, I have to do that. So I have to be out there kind of meeting people, whether they're media or people who perhaps want to support us with, generous support, or people who are just interested in what we do. I'm constantly kind of building those relationships and holding those relationships. And then but then there's obviously a very important internally facing role as well, which is about just making sure that we have a clear strategy or plan that we're trying to kind of work to, that we have that theory of change, that we're making some of those difficult choices that we have to make about where we spend our money, all that kind of stuff. And then also I feel very strongly that I am the members' cheerleader. So
Yeah,
we have this great membership. And I feel very strongly that their voice, is important and is heard in how we think
yeah,
about what we do. And so, my job falls into different buckets, I suppose, of what I'm
yeah,
doing when. Um, and then, we have a great board of trustees who are all voluntary.
yeah,
And I guess I am the interface with them as well in terms of being accountable for what the organisation is doing and whether it's achieving what it sets out to do or not. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah. So in terms of governance, like, do
mm,
they, I mean, obviously trustees tend to oversee, are you spending the money wisely? But does that include actually being quite involved in how the strategy develops or how the
yeah,
strategy is
yeah.
focused and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so we've just done. So we had set ourselves a sort of 10-year trajectory back in 2020, and we always
Yeah.
said at the midpoint we'd do a big review. So we measure our progress every year, and we're quite hard on
Mm,
ourselves in terms of whether we're achieving what we set out to achieve or not. But we always said we'd do a big review at the halfway point. They've been very involved in that, for example. And they will also kind of lean in and help us with some of the trickier stuff that we're doing,
right.
making some difficult decisions about where we work, how we work. They will kind of lean in and help us with that, which is great. Yeah.
Mm, yeah. And when you were talking about the external facing stuff, I guess some of that is like formal politics and committees and yeah, all the stuff that happens at Westminster and other parliaments. Um, I mean, how's that? I mean, do you enjoy that? I mean, how is that for you?
Well, yes, it's interesting because we're apolitical. We're a charity, so we're not political in that sense at all. But
Yeah,
we absolutely have to be in that political world in order to influence the right policy for nature. So that's what we're trying to
mm,
do, basically.
yeah,
Um, and it is an interesting world to work in. And sometimes, a bit like the sand deal example I gave, you can campaign for decades, provide all the
yeah,
science, all the information, and then suddenly you get that turnaround and a decision is made in the right direction.
yeah,
Um, and then sometimes it's much faster than that. I mean, we've been doing a lot of work just in the last 6 months on the planning and infrastructure bill, which has been working its way through government.
yeah,
And that's obviously very important from our perspective in terms of making sure that the protections for the natural world are not overturned, and that we're able to kind of make sure we can see a thriving natural world alongside development, which we think is entirely possible. I mean, we do a lot of work with Barrett's Redrow, for example, a big house builder, and we've done some
Mm.
amazing work with them on big kind of housing developments where you've actually got more nature on the back of a housing development rather than less. So,
Right.
providing our input to that kind of work and making sure that we are comfortable, from our perspective, that nature is
Mm.
not being done over as in the push for
Yeah.
economic growth feels really important. So that's an example of where we would kind of, really try and get involved in that debate. And we'd probably do it by working with government, but we'd also make sure that our members' views were clear in terms of what they are seeking as well. So
Yeah.
campaign work too. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. And I mean, I've no idea whether this is happening in the UK right now, but I can imagine a similar organisation in the States might have some difficulty presenting its science in a world in which, you know, some of the science is no longer able to be talked about, and you
Mm.
know, and I know at a council level, in some parts of the UK that can happen. I mean, how are you finding it?
Yeah, I think we stick to the science pretty
Yeah,
rigorously. I mean, we are very much a science-based organisation.
yeah,
We have this science team that I talked about, which is about kind of 50 odd staff.
right,
And they are based a lot out of something called CCI, which is a sort of a Cambridge-based
hmm,
amalgamation of many kind of organisations working on the science around conservation. And we pretty rigorously stick to it and share that science, and that
yeah,
ultimately, that is the evidence that we can present that allows us to achieve the change we want to achieve. So that's kind of where we sit on it, and that's both climate science and also kind of nature science, and the two often come together. We're often working a lot on what we call nature-based solutions. So looking at things, looking at what peatland can contribute to climate adaptation, for example, looking at what coastlines can contribute, So we're often right at the nexus of those two things.
yeah,
And I think to ignore the science when we're facing into these two crises is foolish in the extreme, really. Yeah. So we
absolutely,
absolutely
yeah,
stick to it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, brilliant. So I think I'd like to know something about you as a leader now, because you're a very experienced CEO who's led large organizations for more than a decade. And some of the folks watching the or listening to this will be earlier in their leadership career. I mean, first of all, did you know you were going to be the CEO? I mean, was it like really clear to you when you were in your National Trust days that that's definitely what I want to do? I want to run organizations.
No. I mean, I kind of, I felt, I think what I'm driven by is being somewhere where I think I can make the most difference.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's being CEO, sometimes it's not being CEO, but um so that's what's driven me really. So actually, when I was, back when I was running the Stourhead estate, I loved that job because, I had a whole estate to kind of worry about and kind of and sort of, make change across. And so I think being somewhere where I can make most difference for the cause I
Yeah.
really believe in, and that only, and interestingly, that has only strengthened with age. So I'm not in a zone where I'm thinking, well, I'm 58 now. Maybe it's time to stop. I'm very much in a zone where I'm thinking, hey, all of this, terrible change for nature, a lot of it has happened in my lifetime, in the last kind of 50 years. And so
Hmm.
therefore the kind of the impulse to make a real difference to that, I find strengthens with my age actually, rather than dissipates.
So, so in
I might
terms
not
of
be saying that
the
tomorrow.
fire in your belly, so the kind
Yeah,
of the fire in
yeah,
your belly, the passion for this
yeah,
purpose, actually more now
yeah,
than before.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And I think so. I think
yeah,
that's interesting. I think I'm a pretty strongly purpose driven person, I suppose. So I don't think I wouldn't want to be CEO of a widget producing organization.
Mega
That wouldn't
corp. Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that, but it wouldn't do it for
Yeah.
me. It has to be something I really believe in. And I think being CEO, it's, you kind of, you give yourself to the job, really. Whatever people say, ultimately, there's a lot of you that goes into that role, because you're having to kind of lead from an emotional space and a sort of spiritual space, as well as a technical space. And therefore, I think for me, it has to be something I really believe in order to make
Yeah.
that kind of commitment that I think
Yeah.
is required. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Does that mean you're never really off?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, are
It does.
CEOs ever off? I don't know if
I
CEOs
don't know. I'm
are.
not. Yeah.
No.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not. That's not. I'm not. That's not to say that I'm kind of, slaving away every minute of every day
No.
and night. But I'm constantly thinking about why we exist and what we're trying to do and how we make that shift to
Yeah.
win that bigger battle around nature, rather than just small victories along the way. And that's
Yeah.
constantly on my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. You just said something that was very interesting, kind of in passing, but I want to come back to it, which was leading emotionally and spiritually.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder what you mean by that.
Well, I just don't think it's purely a sort of, it's not, you know, uh, when I was kind of back in my management consultancy days, you would always kind of talk about, pulling the levers of structure, pulling the levers of process, pulling the levers of culture, and that you had to do all those three things. They all mattered, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. And I think that's really true. But I think, for a purpose-driven organisation where, the bulk of people who are either members, volunteers, staff members of the RSPB are very driven by wanting to make a difference. And I think you just have to rise to that challenge, and you have to be equally driven. And that's not on the one hand, that's amazing, because you get all this energy and effort, and people make huge kind of contributions. On the other hand, it can be quite difficult, because people often feel very passionately about a particular part of the agenda that might not be in the strategy for the next 5 years. So
Yeah.
managing that, and then I think also we're seeing, certainly amongst our staff, we're seeing increased eco anxiety, because the thing they really believe in, the thing they have given their life really to kind of helping change, it's in a really dire state, and they have to face into that every day, and
Yeah.
I think that's really tough. So making sure that we're supporting people's well-being, so that they can have the management strategies and management techniques they need to deal with that, is
Yeah.
increasingly important, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now
Now I
all of
think
that
you're the
really is, it's about being in a purpose-driven
yeah.
organization, and the
Yeah.
challenges that particularly brings.
Yeah. And certainly I'd echo that. My experience over the years has been the more an organization is genuinely purpose driven, and NGOs, charities tend to be more like that than for-profit corporates, although there are some
Yeah.
exceptions.
Yeah.
um, the more likely it is that the kind of conflict you get in the organization is kind of more important in some ways, because birds or healthcare or
Yeah.
research matters to the folks more than market share.
Yeah.
you,
Absolutely.
and you really care, and therefore it requires a different kind of handling and a different kind of leading.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you also talked about something which I haven't heard on any of these podcasts so far, which was eco anxiety.
Mm.
And so, what do you? I mean, and you talked about the importance of supporting people. I mean, how do you, as a leader, support eco anxiety in an organisation of you know thousands of staff and more thousands of volunteers and 1 million members? I mean, that's a lot. It's a big group to be anxious.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, we particularly focus on staff.
Mm.
But we do also kind of talk. We will talk with volunteers about it as well. Probably less so with members, although I suppose if I think about my inbox, some of the communication I get from members will be around, we need to do more on this, or why aren't we doing more on that, and and being able to kind of respond to that. I think with staff in particular, a lot of it is just about accepting that you might feel this, and when we've surveyed the staff, we know it's more acute in what I would call kind of our global conservation team, our reserves team, so the teams who are kind of really facing into it every day. um, and really we take mental health seriously, which I know
Yeah,
increasingly most organizations do, but we take it very seriously. And then B, it's just having some opportunities where folk can kind of just share the way in which the techniques they have found help them deal with this. And often it's
yeah,
quite simple things like, ironically, being out in nature is a
yeah,
really
yeah,
important technique that a lot of our staff would use to kind of deal with feeling anxious
yeah,
about it. For me personally, also working in an organization that I feel is trying to tackle it is really important.
yeah,
um, and
yeah,
just kind of providing the space really for people to kind of share and learn and develop those techniques just feels really important at the moment. Because
yeah,
it can be crippling otherwise. You can end up sort of in
yeah,
a place where A, your mental health is in a terrible state, but B, you're unable to contribute. So we need to kind of make sure that we are able to kind of help people deal with that.
yeah. Well, that sounds both essential, really important, and fantastically good news that you're paying attention to it. Um, I'm conscious that we're like 30 odd minutes in, and there's a couple of things I still want to ask you. I want to go right back. I want to go back to studying English and yeah,
Yeah.
and your love of language. And I know you were um, back in the day. Um, you either sponsored or supported um, the canal poet. I've forgotten her name. Joe. I know
Oh,
you, Joe.
Joe.
Joe Webb.
Yes. Yeah.
Joe. Yeah. And I'm thinking. So, does art, literature, poetry play much of a role either in your organisation or in nurturing you as a leader?
Definitely. I mean, I
Yeah.
think, in terms of our work in the organisation, we've often done things where we've worked with artists or we've worked with writers, who can really, I think, sort of highlight for people a different way into thinking about the natural world or a different way of
Yeah.
appreciating it. And I think that can be really, really powerful, because it connects with often people's emotional core. So I'm just thinking of one thing off the top of my head right now is we've got a great celebration of the reintroduction of the white-tailed eagle, which
Right.
is it's the 50th anniversary of it this year, where basically white-tailed eagles were brought back to the Scottish Western Isles, and have now been a huge success story in terms of breeding successfully. And we've worked with a fantastic singer-songwriter who's written some music to go with a film that we've made about this
Uh,
story. And it's beautiful. It's really, really beautiful. And we've done
uh,
similar work on the
and,
curlew.
and sorry, is that out in the world now? Is it something
It's
we can
coming
send a
out. It's
link?
coming out. It's imminent. It's
Oh, so
imminent.
we
Yeah,
can't
it'll
put a
be
link
out.
to it just
No,
yet, right?
not
No,
just yet,
okay,
but it's
yeah,
coming out. And
yeah,
I think
mm,
it's a really powerful way in for people. For me personally, it's really important as well. So I still read a lot. I read a lot of the kind of nature writing that goes on, some of which I think is complete woo-woo, but some of which I think is really, really strong.
yeah,
At the moment, actually, I'm just reading a great new piece of fiction by Sarah Hall, who's a great writer based up in Cumbria, who's written a new novel all about Helm, which is the wind that blows up in that bit of Cumbria. And it's great, and it's got lots of environmental stuff in it. And she's a writer I really admire. So I still kind of, for me, it's just really important keeping that connection. And I think it works for a lot of people, but you just have to find the different thing that works for you and gives you that kind of emotional access into nature. For some people, it's just being out in nature, but for others, some kind of artistic interpretation of it can really help, I think.
Yeah, that's lovely. I mean, I also like the idea of, yeah, some of it being a bit woo. I mean, I just wonder, and I think, that's probably going to be different for all of us, because
Yeah,
I recently did Peter Reason's Living Waters Inquiry, which is an action research group into, it was a panpsychic inquiry for 6 weeks into
yeah,
what would it be like to meet bodies of water as sentient beings,
yes,
uh, which was a real edge for me, because on the whole, I don't have much difficulty meeting a tree as a sentient being, but
yeah,
I have
yeah,
enormous difficulty meeting a river as a sentient being. I mean, if I take Robert Macfarlane's new book,
yes,
Is a River Alive? At
yes,
one level,
yeah,
I go, rather like his son. His son went kind of, duh, of course it is. And at another level, it's not there at all. The river actually is a really transient thing. It hardly exists. It's every moment it's a different thing.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and where does the river start and end? Just the source, the mouth, or the clouds? What is the river?
yeah, yeah.
Um, so I could see how that could be woo, but equally it's also system
Yeah.
science, isn't it?
No, no,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't see that kind of stuff as woo, actually. So I think,
yeah,
all the stuff that's been going on globally in terms of legal recognition of nature as a kind of as entities and kind of, providing what we really need to survive as a species ourselves is really important. So I think
yeah,
I would I'm meaning more some of the kind of, what do I not particularly enjoy? This kind of, I sat in a field and I saw this and it reminded me. I don't know. I think some of the writing it's not all equal. I would guess nature writing, I would say, and just kind of,
yeah,
as you would with any writing, you kind of go into it with a slightly kind of critical eye. But
yeah,
yeah, but I love that kind of that Rob McFarlane kind of approach and that the kind of the legal work that's going on around that.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's going to really grow in importance for us over the
So
coming
do I.
decades. Yeah.
And I have to say, I mean, and this, you and I have a connection to Hawkwood in common from
Mm.
going back. But I was at a Hawkwood um, back in the day where I first met Polly Higgins, and of course Polly and her ecocide work. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes. Yeah.
Sadly, she's long gone, but such
Yeah.
brilliant work, and nothing woo about that. I mean, she was a brilliant legal mind, and that work is part of what now is bearing fruit in all the um, rights for rivers, rights
Yes.
of landscapes, etc. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And this stuff
mm,
really, really does matter, for us. You
yeah,
can, well, I mean, we believe at the RSPB that these species have an intrinsic right to kind of, exist in the world alongside us. But, but
yeah,
when you look at how our own species is just so reliant on the natural world and takes so much of it for granted, that has got to change. Otherwise, we will literally be destroying the ecosystems that mean that we can thrive. So,
absolutely.
that I think that will change. I just, the big thing is it going to change in time because there is an urgency around this, because it's disappearing before our eyes. So we need to
Yeah,
get it to change in time.
yeah. Final thing then. Fire in your belly for the next thing. I mean, I'm not saying next job. You've got plenty to do at the moment, but next thing. I mean, what's exciting?
Oh, that's a really good question, actually. I sort of can't imagine doing any other job than this, but I always
Yeah,
feel like that when I'm in the job because you're kind of right in it, and
yeah,
being able to extract yourself from it, I find very, very difficult. Um, I would love, I think, at some point in the future, just to have a piece of land somewhere that was big enough, and I could turn into a really good place for nature and be very, very hands on with it. That would absolutely excite me. Um, but as would kind of being able to, I think there's some really exciting stuff going on right now in terms of private landowners, what they're getting up to,
yeah,
farmers. There are some farmers that are doing some really exciting work in terms of kind of, regenerative farming methods. I think, just making sure that that kind of web of change is it's a healthy web and it's thriving, but is also kind of growing. That really excites me. I think it's not going to be. I don't. The answer isn't going to be about the RSPB being bigger and doing more, etc., etc. The answer is going to be about that web and that web of kind of change really taking off and happening, and that's what I'm really interested in.
Mm. And in a small way, I hope that um, these little podcasts play a part in that, because I'm trying to
Part
join
of the
up
web. Yeah.
part of the web. Exactly. I mean, if I if I'm if I'm anything, I'm part of a fungal web. So I
Yeah.
yeah yeah
Well,
um,
we increasingly know that mycorrhizal fungi are what everything is based on in terms of life. So, being part of a fungal
yeah.
web, it's a good thing.
I would think it is, and it's yeah you know it's a good metaphor, but it's not just a metaphor. There's an awful
No.
lot more to it than that.
Yeah.
Beccy,
Yeah.
we could go on for hours, days, weeks. We're going to have to stop because it's 45 minutes. Let me say something to close off the episode, then I'll come back and say a proper thank you before we finish. So, everybody, brilliant episode with Beccy Speight. Um, there are so many connections between this and other episodes, including the Sue Pritchard food and farming one, the Rob Sexton regenerative farming one, the Giles Hutchins future fit one, and many more. I'll try to make some links in the show notes, but just dig into the other episodes. Meanwhile, Beccy, it's so brilliant to have you here and good to see you again after all this time.
Oh, it's
Thanks for
great to see you,
coming.
Chris. Yeah, yeah, absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was great.